I'm here with Tamara Lehman, who's a professor here at CU Boulder, and we're really representing the CU Boulder Democracy Group that's here at CU Boulder, which is an interdisciplinary group of professors and students who are really interested in looking at the intersection of like computer science and how it affects our democracy and democracies around the world. So who we are, first up, Tamara Lehman. And I am so sorry, Tamara, when you told me if you were going to introduce yourself or not, my headphones switched over and I didn't catch that. So I'm just going to introduce you. She is a professor in the electrical and computer engineering department. She got her PhD at Duke. Her research interests lie in hardware security and computer architecture primarily. And she is from Argentina originally. I am Rhett Hanscom. I'm a PhD student here at CU Boulder. My advisor is Dr. Tamara Lehman. I'm from Dallas, Texas, and my research interests are really the intersection of computer science and like social issues, and then additionally like operating systems and like lower level computing as well. Some other people who have been really major contributors to the work that I'm talking about are Christine and Shiv, who are both in the computer science department at CU Boulder as well. So I want to give them a shout out before we start talking about some of the work, because they were super instrumental in creating it. So some previous work that's come out of the democracy group here at CU in the last few years. We've got a paper under review at CSCW 2024, which is going to be a characterization of toxicity across social media platforms. And we're going to dig into that a little bit more later, since that's the work that I was a primary contributor on. Some other work we've done would be understanding how readers determine the legitimacy of online medical news in an era of fake news. That was published in 2022 at ASNAM. We've also looked at how Twitter users change their behavior after the exposure to misinformation. That was published at SNAM 2022. And then additionally, another paper that I led would be analyzing Twitter users' behavior before and after contact by Russia's Internet Research Agency. And that was a 2021 paper at CSCW. So we're going to be talking about a couple of these in more depth, as well as what we're currently working on. So first up, we're going to talk about analyzing Twitter users' behavior before and after contact by Russia's Internet Research Agency. So what is the goal of this work when we went into it? We really wanted to understand how Twitter users were affected when they were contacted by Russia's Internet Research Agency. And we'll unpack each of these things in a little bit more depth here. So what is the Internet Research Agency? Well, that was a Russian troll farm, which was created in order to ostensibly affect the elections of other countries. And this was something that's been well documented. We were not interested in figuring out if this occurred, but moreover, what effect it might have had. So another big motivation in this was a lot of the media after this election really heralded a couple of pieces of research, such as this one, which said that effectively their campaign, the campaign led by Russia, had no tangible results in the US election. And I think our problem with that was kind of like how you dice it. It's semantics, really, like what effect it had. A lot of the papers that were published essentially said that no votes were likely to have flipped. But that's not the same thing as having no effect. So that's why we wanted to study this issue a little bit more deeply. So if we talk about how we approached this issue, we found about 3,500 accounts that were identified by Twitter as being affiliated with the IRA. We then looked into the accounts that came into contact with these Russian troll accounts. So you could have been contacted by these accounts in a couple of different ways. They could have replied to one of your tweets. They could have mentioned you. They could have retweeted you. They could have also DM'd you or done some other things that would have been more private. But we were only able to get the public-facing data. So we were able to collect all of that. And then we essentially ran some statistical tests to figure out if the behavior was changed in the 6 months before and after contact by these Russian bots. So we will talk about some of the interesting steps here. So how we got all of this data was through Twitter itself. We were able to collect an unredacted, completely like untouched data set that contained the totality of the data on the IRA users themselves. So all of the users that were like certainly affiliated with Russia from Twitter directly. We then found the most heavily contacted users which interacted with them. So what we mean here is that they were in contact with the IRA on numerous occasions, as well as through numerous means. So on like different days, on different tweets, they were having some kind of connection with these IRA accounts. We divided the heavily contacted users into different categories based on their follower size. We were really interested in seeing if users with more following or less following would be affected differently or were perhaps targeted differently by the IRA. So we did divide on the 5,000 follower line, which was supported by some other research. We then started our pruning steps to look at what like the most like pertinent users. So what we took out would be the bots. We took out users with insufficient data. So they needed to be active Twitter users across the whole timeline in order to be considered for the before and after analysis. And because we were keeping the focus of this work to the US presidential election, and we were working with like self-reported data on Twitter, the only way we had to do that was to do a language restriction and keep users in only if they posted 75% of their tweets in English. So after we finished the pruning, we further divided the groups into those who responded back to the IRA and those who did not. So at this point, we have 4 groups. We've got low follower count groups, high follower count groups, and within those categories, those who responded back and those who didn't. So a responsive user is one who maybe tweeted something and then the IRA responded, and then they again responded to the IRA. So there's a back and forth that's been absolutely established within the responsive users. So altogether, once we've done all of our pruning, all of our pre-processing, we've got everybody in their little buckets. This is the spread of the users that we were able to collect. It was about a little bit over 4,000 users, I want to say. And it was hundreds of thousands of tweets that we collected. So if we look at this on a timeline of that first point of contact between a user and the IRA, this is going to be just for the low follower count users, 5,000 or less, but it's pretty similar across both groups. And what we see here is that the IRA was reaching out to people as early as 2010, but it was quite rare. The troll activity out of Russia was really unsophisticated and in its early stages at this point. But by 2014, it starts really amping up. And then in 2015, it's at its peak, kind of tampers down in 2016, right before or after the election. And then in 2017 is when Twitter came in and actually deleted all of these accounts and flagged them as likely Russian agents. And at that point, they were no longer on Twitter. So we also did this distribution for the high follower count users, but it's more or less the same spread here. So some things that we looked at with these users and their behavior would include their monthly tweet count, like how much were they actively on Twitter and like how much were they using the platform. So here is our lower follower count user group. What we have are the 12 months before and after the election, although all of the statistical tests are just on the 6 months before and after. And the red dotted line down the middle is going to be the initial point of contact that they had with the Russian Twitter account. So within this group, we found that both subgroups, the responsive and the unresponsive groups, did exhibit increased tweet frequency after this point of contact. When we looked at the higher follower count group, where less people tended to be responsive, we still found that there was additional tweet activity in the months after IRA contact. So another metric that we looked at, oh, just kidding. So in order to understand if this was something that was happening on Twitter in general at this time, or if this was specific to these groups of people, we did compare them to a random baseline of Twitter users that were active on the platform during that time. And we did find that something about the users that the IRA interacted with is that they were much more frequent users of Twitter in general than the average Twitter user. They were like highly politically, maybe not politically charged, but highly like discussive on Twitter during this time period, for sure. So we also looked at the sentiment of the tweets that these users were posting before and after this contact with Russia. So low follower count group up first. We've got the yellow lines, which are the non-responsive, blue lines, which are responsive, and the red line down the middle, which is the initial point of contact by IRA. Here we found that the responsive users did become significantly more negative in sentiment after the contact with Russia. That wasn't true for the unresponsive group that didn't like engage in a discussion with a Russian troll account, though. If we look at the high follower count group, we found that both of these groups also, after the initial point of contact, did have some significantly decreased sentiment in this time period. So again, we compared this to a baseline of users who were active on Twitter during this time period. And we found that all of these groups, likely people who were, really entrenched in the political commentary and discourse on Twitter at the time, tended to be more negative in general across the entire timeline that we were collecting information. So also something we tracked was the number of times they were mentioning the Donald Trump account on Twitter when he was still a Twitter user. So with the low follower count group first, and then the high follower count group, we found that across all different categories, they were using the Donald Trump handle with increased frequency after engaging with the IRA. So we also tracked Hillary Clinton, the other candidate at the time. And again, we found that after this point of contact with the IRA, all of these groups were significantly more likely to be posting tweets which tagged Hillary Clinton. So what did we find here? Well, we found that there was an increased tweet activity in the months after IRA contact. And something that I didn't hit on that I meant to earlier is that this point that we're looking at, this red line right down the middle, which represents the IRA contact, that is different for each person in each account. So these trends aren't necessarily just increasing on Twitter as a whole. That's why we're comparing them to the baseline. And it is certainly all linked around this interaction with the IRA. So what did we find? The increased monthly tweet activity after contact from Russia, decreased sentiment, increased mentions of the political candidates that were running at the time, and the random baseline shows that these changes are not generalizable to the rest of the Twitter population. There were a lot of limitations to this study. No causality can be claimed. Like, we're not necessarily saying that because these people interacted with a Russian troll account, they had these changes. It could have been any number of things. It could have just been having somebody, reinforce their ideas. So we're not saying, it's absolutely a cause and effect, but we are just noticing these changes. Also, data is self-reported through Twitter. We can only collect the data that is still available. We collected this data, I believe, starting in 2019, which was several years after the tweets that we were considering. So there was a number of years in which users could have deleted or changed their account information, and we just have really no way to know about any of that. Sentiment analysis can also be kind of tricky. We weren't looking at it in a really individualized way where like the direction of each tweet, was we didn't understand, like, were they, tweeting negatively at one candidate versus the other. We were just tracking like overall trends in a user's sentiment. So that was a little bit of a limitation as well. But some big conclusions from this work were just that we took away social media is dangerous. We all need to be aware of our interactions online. There are often ulterior motives for accounts on social media. And our democracy is really important. As we have another election coming up in this next year, it's important to keep that in mind. So let's preserve it. So we're kind of going to cover 3 big tiers of work within the lab today. It's going to be misinformation, toxicity, and then a recommendation system we're working on now. This wraps up misinformation. Are there any questions from anybody that I can answer before we move on? Cool, let's keep it pumping. So paper that I have in consideration at CSCW is the characterization of toxicity across social media platforms. So what does that mean? We hear the term toxicity a lot in the modern vernacular, but it seems like every time somebody uses that word, it's really defined by the context of that conversation or dialogue. So we really wanted to dig in a little bit deeper. And toxicity is something that I feel like most people come to understand as like the combined negative effects of social media. So some of those things are the fact that like social media is designed to be purposefully addictive. Many people feel more isolated and alone after spending more time on social media. This is well documented in self-esteem, which lowers the more time you spend on apps like Instagram. There is a phenomenon on social media wherein people tend to be more honest, but also more mean. Like we learn as young people that maybe giving somebody your most unfiltered opinion on them is honest, but not like nice or the right thing to do. And that line becomes a little bit more blurred on social media. There is just a large disconnect between behaviors in reality and online. Like having that lack of immediate emotional feedback from the person you're conversing with makes your behavior different on the internet. And a lot of social media platforms and algorithms really encourage discourse, right? We've seen that like misinformation spreads at like 4 times the rate of non-disinformation. So all of these things together really culminate in this like phenomenon of internet toxicity, kind of in the zeitgeist, I feel. So we wanted to dig into that. So some previous research on toxicity that's been published, according to Google Scholar, if you look at works that mention toxicity and social media, there's been some 800,000 if we look at like the totality of all of time, with like 17,500 being published in the last 12 months alone. If we further look at only papers that attempt to define toxicity only and also relate to social media, only 95 papers have ever attempted to put these words together, 38 of which were published in the last year. I went through each of those by hand to understand which of those like actually attempted to define like what toxicity is as it relates to the way that we use it in our culture. And I really could only find one that actually attempted that. Most papers were really only interested in defining toxicity as it related to their like particular work. So if we look at that information just in a pie chart, we can see that 40% of the papers which have been interested in defining toxicity were published within the last year or so. There's a real eagerness to get to the bottom of what this word means currently. So we took a stab at it, and some contributions that we came up with in this work were really doing a deep dive of this phenomenon and all of the different pieces that lead to it, like misinformation, polarization, filter bubbles, which are like the research word for what would be colloquially known as an echo chamber. We formally define online toxicity, which we'll look at in a second. We also proposed a novel view of what toxicity is and how it manifests on the internet, which we coined the cycle of internet extremism, which we'll also discuss a little bit. We synthesized and combined the modern state of best practices for identifying toxicity on the internet, given the tools available. We talk about some mitigation techniques. We identified gaps and areas for future research as well. So how did we define online toxicity? We define toxicity as interactions directed at an entity designed to be inflammatory and purposefully breed dissension. So this really positions toxicity as a very separate thing from negativity, which is going to always be a part of communication. And toxicity is really rooted in this notion that it is against something and purposefully designed to be divisive. So we also coined the cycle of internet extremism, and this really came about as we did this characterization paper on toxicity. We're looking at toxicity from so many different angles, from so many different researchers, and we've already done work that looks at filter bubbles and misinformation and polarization. And when we start looking at all of that together, if you consider a person who is in a filter bubble, perhaps they're on like a really, radical like political subreddit. Something that we've found is that in filter bubbles, misinformation really thrives. It's a great place for the users to share it with each other. So if you're in a filter bubble, misinformation, it's already just bouncing around. And then another part of that, another effect of being in a filter bubble is that as you're there for longer and longer and they become more and more radical, you become more and more polarized. Specifically an effective form of polarization, which says that as your ideals become different, like more and more different from other people, you inherently place less and less value in those people. So as you see people as being more different than you politically, you place less value on them. So these are both occurring like at an intra-community level where like the users are feeding off each other in order to spread both of these things amongst each other. And then we propose that toxicity is the externally facing byproduct of that. So as these people feed off each other and they're in group setting, becoming more and more polarized and more charged, toxicity is what happens when these people interact with people outside of their like traditional in-group setting. So as they see people that they view as out-group members, that's when that toxicity really begins to emerge as they position themselves like against these out-group members. So we proposed this cycle. I need to do follow-up research on it to really dig down into this. Hopefully I could do something with the 2024 election, but we'll kind of talk about avenues of future research at the end of this. That briefly wraps up the toxicity work that we've done. If there's any questions on that, I would be happy to take them now.
1 second, I'm
All right. Let's continue forward. So currently we're working on building a personality aware social media recommendation system. So what does that mean? All right, so our motivations. I'm really interested in bringing aspects of real world social structures and communities into virtual spaces. It's kind of like I touched on with toxicity before. It's the notion that within virtual spaces, we don't have the instant like emotional feedback and conversation that allows people to maybe behave more freely on social media, and not like consider the consequences. I'm just interested in ways that we can bring more of the long-standing practices of like face-to-face societies into social media to have like a more harmonious experience for everybody. So the idea for this work, commonalities bind people together in the real world. Topics are an important part of language, but so are tone, body language, enthusiasm. Yet topics are the de facto mechanism used to match people from like an NLP perspective. Outside of, there's other ways, but if we're talking about like based on what people say and not like friend networks and things like that. So how can we bring other nuanced pieces of conversation into these virtual spaces? Build a social media specific recommendation system which matches on communication style was the idea. So if we had a sentence like this, I love fast, or a phrase like this, I love fast cars, engines are so complicated and powerful, BMWs, Teslas, and Audis are my favorite. A more traditional recommendation system would maybe match on the green words. But we were like, what if we matched on the green words here instead of the nouns, instead of cars, engines, BMWs, Teslas? We matched on I love fast, are so complicated and powerful. And maybe we could recommend this user, not another user who was interested in cars, but someone who was interested in like spacecrafts, which also share a lot of features of cars, but are different, but they had very similar enthusiasm about these ideas. That could be something that brought them together. Well, it wasn't so easy to just do it that way because a lot of those words are fillers. So as our first wave into this, we were like, what if instead of like communication style directly, we match on personality type? So there's a lot of there's like a host of other problems that come with that. But that's where we are now. So in the background of this, there were some things to get a study like this up and running that I had to complete. First up, we needed to build a personality classifier, which will essentially go to somebody's social media platform and just pull all of the public posts that they've made, and then it will assign them to a personality type according to the Myers-Briggs personality test. There's also a need to generate content for the study that we are looking at. So for this, we are working with ChatGPT right now. So I'll talk about that a little bit more in a couple slides. And then all of this needs to come together to build the recommendation system, which will use all of this information, right? Conversation style, content that they've interacted with, as well as their assumed personality type, in order to recommend other users and posts. So we wanted to bring in users to do a study on this. And the way that that's going to be working is first we'll have them take a Myers-Briggs personality test. We're then going to enroll them in some online communities. So it could be Facebook or Reddit, and there'll be some couple hundred of users in each of these communities. And what we'll be doing is in this first wave, we'll be generating posts with ChatGPT that target a specific personality type. And then we will be tracking the community interactions, both between users and these like topic posts, which are like meant to like start a discussion. And so we're really interested in what personality types work with each other ones. We don't want to just say like, user A is an ISFP, so recommend them, other ISFP personality stuff. We want to really understand like, what do each of the characteristics of personality look for whenever they're communicating with people on the internet. So they could very well like communicate best with users of a different personality type. So when we were making content that is geared at targeting one specific personality tenet, we can look at just this left side for now. So the first division on the Myers-Briggs personality type is going to be extroversion versus introversion. So we've got some topic posts which should like indirectly target one of these criteria. So an example of a post that would be targeting an introversion type user would be one like this: creating in silence, minifying creativity and solitude. Do you have a creative project you're passionate about? Kind of that nature. And then if we look at this sensing versus intuition division, we've got one that's an intuitive post that's like really focusing on like global perspectives and the perspectives of others and that kind of more like emotional based intelligence. On the other side of the Myers-Briggs, we've got thinking and feeling. If we focus in on thinking, we've got the puzzle of existence. And we can also do this on judging versus perceiving. We did get all of these posts at this point from ChatGPT. It ended up working really well. When we said we essentially would like some text that indirectly targets like a tenet of personality type, insert that for each of these, and we were able to get like 50 really, really quickly for each of these personality types. So that's where we are currently. We're at the onboarding process with our participants. So as we look to the future of this work, what will it look like? We'll be iteratively training and merging all of these models that we're building. I definitely want to move away from ChatGPT, but we were spending a lot of time on generating that content right now, and it is kind of tertiary to our greater goal. So as we get more and more content to learn from, I am hoping to build a better content generation tool for our participants. But as these iterations continue, we'll be constantly upgrading and merging the recommendation system, content generation, and the ML classifier, which puts every user into a different bucket of personality type. Some other ways that we hope to advance our classifier later would be maybe understanding when different people are more reflective of different personality traits. Like people aren't typically only one personality type and that's stagnant forever. They change over time. They change depending on who they're talking to. They change depending on the circumstance. Like there is like a small amount of room for flexibility there if we want our classifier to reflect that flexibility as well. We also really want to introduce this recommendation system into a real online community and see how it does. We're looking towards Mastodon to get that accomplished in the future, hopefully. We're more looking at content-based matching at this point, but we were also hoping to incorporate a complete profile-based matching as well. So not just like kind of right now, but your full history and like online presence. And then also, I feel like the most interesting and novel like applications of this work really are the fact that like we're all on Zoom right now, right? Like communication on social media isn't only happening in text anymore. And that's like the first wave of this, but like people are talking on TikTok lives, on Instagram lives, and tons of videos on like long form YouTube content. Like we need to be bringing conversation into this mix. And it starts with NLP, but like it's quickly going to leave this space and be something that I think should be introduced in these other areas that are going to be the social medias of the future, you know? So that wraps up where we are on our newest project, which is the personality aware recommendation systems. Do we have any questions on that before we tackle what we're going to be working on in the future with the democracy group? Cool. So upcoming 2024 projects, if anybody is looking for something to get involved in, we are interested in looking at all things surrounding the 2024 presidential election. The time to start collecting data is now. That's going to be, I don't know. We'll see how the 2024 election goes, but the democracy group will be there to study it as it unfolds. We also really want to do a follow-up work on this proposed cycle of internet extremism. Right now, all of the links drawn were other people's research for the most part, because it was a characterization and systemization paper. I want to do my own work in this space to really get to the bottom of it and do the math myself. And then, like I said, we really want to do some practical applications of this personality aware recommendation system, implement this over an existing online community, and see if we can't get some better algorithms out there for the people. Yeah, so that's really all I've got for everybody today. It's just a look at what I've been doing with the democracy group here at CU. Anybody have any questions? Anything I can follow up on?
Yeah, I had a quick question. So about the personality aware recommendation system, how did you, maybe you touched on this, but like, how did you collect data based on the different, I know you used Myers-Briggs, the Myers-Briggs test, but like, for example, there's like sensing versus judging. How do you like quantify that in terms of what content is catered to people who are like sensing versus judging, or like extroverts versus introverts? I mean, that idea itself is really interesting to me, but I guess if you could talk a little bit more about that, that'd be cool.
Yeah. So to train our classifier initially, there was a Kaggle data set of like a bunch of users and their most recent like 100 social media posts, and it had their like Myers-Briggs personality type. So I took that to be like the initial seed of my training system. But and we discussed kind of what you're asking a lot in our group. And where we and like ultimately fell is we're not trying to build a classifier that like isolates personality as like the major contribution of this. Instead, we really just want to create a bunch of buckets of different types of personality. And we were just using that as like a way to sort them. And yeah, that's, and then we could like, we're hoping to later like understand the nuanced differences between each bucket like better once we get more and more data, but it's mostly just a starting place in order to get people into different buckets, to be honest. Does that answer your question? Gonna assume yes and keep it going. Who's got another question for me?
I have a short question. Have you ever think about any privacy preserving machine learning for recommendation system?
Say that
Is
one more time.
any privacy preserving machine learning algorithms for recommendation systems like any other federated learning or split learning or anything?
Did you say any like privacy concerns?
Yes, any privacy concern.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like a huge problem. I don't think the personality aware social media recommendation system is going to help our privacy problem. Um, yeah, but I like privacy is like a really important thing that I've studied a lot. It's what drove me to looking at social media. But this particular project is another algorithm that unfortunately is trying to learn everything about every user. So
Okay.
definitely privacy concerns, yeah.
Yes, it's the biggest privacy problem. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Anybody
Sorry,
else?
I
Go ahead.
realized I muted when you were responding to my question. My bad. I guess my follow-ups were similar in terms of the nuances of, like, you haven't really focused on the nuances of the different personality types. I was going to ask similarly, uh like in terms of cross-culturally examining people's, so like personality types and like American people versus, I don't know, people from Asia or Europe, or like their ages. I guess there's a lot of other factors you could take into place. So I was wondering if you guys have discussed those things or thought about it in terms
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. And there's actually been a lot of work that studies that. My undergrad was originally in psychology, and I'm really interested in psychology and sociology. And that's what's really brought me like into the democracy group, really. Is kind of taking that into a computer science direction. But what has been found when you look at conversation styles and personalities across like continents and countries is they are more or less stable. Maybe not the frameworks like the Myers-Briggs stuff, but if you look at the ways that people interact, those are really stable across communities and across languages. So there is a lot of research that supports the idea that, you know, the buckets of personality would be pretty stable across borders and oceans and all of those things, and even languages.
Okay, that makes sense. Maybe if they're all taking in similar content or across cultures, if they are still watching like the same videos. Like for example, I see my little cousin from India like liking the same Instagram reels as me. But we grew up in like very different cultures and backgrounds and upbringings and everything. So that's interesting. That's something that I'm personally interested in researching. So I kind of see. I was just curious to see if that was something you guys talked about as well. But thank
No,
you.
yeah, I mean you hammered on two things that we talked about extensively. Yeah, so great questions.
Cool. Thank you.
Anybody else? My email is here, rhett.hanscom@colorado.edu. Also, Dr. Tamara Lehman. We would love to have anybody who wants to get involved in a project like this, either one that I've discussed, or if you have an idea, like bring it to the table. Like, let's talk about it. We're really passionate about this. Feel free to reach out. Even if you aren't in computer science, it's interdisciplinary. Like, I know how to program things, so you don't necessarily have to. You just have to have good ideas and want to, do something with them. So feel free to reach out for sure. And thank you all so much for coming today.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.